Science as truthful speech, German rationalism and Jewish cosmopolitanism as immoral information distortion equal to the information distortion of Keynesian economics, by Kurt Doolittle. Occam's razor. Is it more likely that German rationalism and Jewish cosmopolitanism, both of which intentionally designed as obscurant anti-scientific deceptions to reimpose their culture's authoritarianism as a replacement for the faith needed to maintain group competitive evolutionary strategy, are correct in their classification of economics as in axiomatic logic (brackets, logically operational system), close brackets, and that such a discipline is somehow not subject to the same moral and epistemological constraint in demonstrative method as are all disciplines that claim to construct laws? Or is it more likely that all disciplines, economics and mathematics included, seek to produce laws from which they can construct models, and that the hypotheses, theories, and laws within those models require the same moral constraints in demonstrated method regardless of discipline? Logical, brackets, internally consistent, close brackets, experimental, brackets, externally correspondent, close brackets, operational, brackets, existentially possible, close brackets, intuitionistic, brackets, subjectively testable, close brackets, and moral, brackets, voluntary transfers, close brackets, but, brackets, and that but is important, close brackets, that each discipline requires only some subset of each properties given the domain of inquiry. In other words, do not the moral rules developed in science constitute a universal method of moral inquiry into the production of true statements, regardless of discipline? Or are there no universal laws of moral inquiry for the purpose of developing truthful statements? Is it more likely that more complex systems require greater moral constraint, and whether we require more or less constraint prior to making truth claims depends upon the properties from which the given system of reasoning is constituted? Comparisons. So let's compare the different approaches on just a few axes. 1. Some economic laws are deducible versus economic regularities are explained by deduction, and thus those hypotheses obtain the status of theory, and when all marginally impactful permutations are identified, these theories can be claimed truthfully as laws. 2. All economic laws are deducible versus some economic laws are deducible. Perhaps, but that does not mean they are not empirically based, brackets, obtained through observation, close brackets. It means only that no instrumentation other than human sense perception is needed to make those observations and deductions, while most non-trivial economic phenomenon and hypotheses, theories and laws we use to describe them are only instrumentally and empirically observable. But once observed, with the assistance of further empirical observations, they are also explainable by deduction using sympathetic testing. 3. Economic laws are deterministic versus economic laws are imprecise general rules of arbitrary precision that demonstrate the greatest variation in outcome. Of all general rules of arbitrary precision in all systems dependent upon the operational use of regular patterns, brackets, other than language, close brackets, in all the logics, brackets, identity, mathematics, physics, economics and language, close brackets, with the least, brackets, precise, close brackets, determinacy of the logics, because a. Humans act to bend such laws constantly for personal gain, and b. Humans attempt to mitigate determinacy, brackets, equilibrium, close brackets, by constructing various permanent disequilibrium that they can continue to extract benefit from, and c. Because causal density, brackets, opportunity, close brackets, is so high, any equilibrating effect can be offset by any other equilibrating effect, and often function in combination. And D, because non-regular events outside the normal distribution, brackets, shocks, stroke, black swans, close brackets, are more influential and less predictable than regular patterns. 4. That economics is unique methodological area of inquiry versus economics benefits merely from the fact that we can subjectively test first principles, whereas in physical science, as yet, we do not know the first principles, while in identity, naming, mathematics, we do. Even if we do not know it yet in physics, economics, language, and imagination. If we know the first principles of any system, we can in fact explain all phenomenon using those first principles, even if we cannot imagine or deduce or hypothesize all consequentially emergent phenomenon. And since we cannot deduce all economic phenomenon, brackets, there are many unsolved problems of economics, as well as mathematics, and certainly of science, close brackets. It may be possible that in any complex system we will never exhaust all emergent phenomenon, brackets, although this certainly seems unlikely if the universe is deterministic, close brackets. Understanding arbitrary precision in general rules. The meaning of, quote, arbitrary precision, close quotes, across disciplines must be understood. A predictive precision of identity, brackets, laws of categorization, close brackets, remains tautological no matter what we do. B. The predictive precision of naming, brackets, laws of numbering, close brackets, remains operational and tautological no matter what we do. C. The predictive precision of mathematical laws, brackets, laws of relations, close brackets, remains constant, independent of physical scale. But since mathematics is an axiomatic system, we cannot take action to alter the consequences of mathematical systems. D. The predictive precision of physical laws, brackets, laws of causality, close brackets, currently varies dependent upon physical scale because we do not know the first principles of the physical universe yet, and we can alter the course of physical events and benefit from them. In fact, the purpose of human action is to predict and alter the course of physical events in order to benefit from them. E. The predictive precision of economic laws, brackets, laws of human cooperation, close brackets, varies considerably, and we constantly alter the course of events to benefit from them by attempting to outwit the altered course of events. F. The predictive precision of linguistic laws, brackets, laws of communication, stroke, negotiation, close brackets, are extremely imprecise, demonstrating extraordinary variability, with only a few general and somewhat deterministic rules, such as the evolution towards song or tonal speech, which requires less effort from the speaker, but the meaning of such speech appears both functional, brackets, increasing in information density while gradually losing earlier meaning, close brackets. G. The predictive precision of laws of imagination, brackets, laws by which we can imagine things, close brackets, is unknown, but at least if operationally limited, appears to be functionally unlimited. Brackets, a function is the name for the collection of mental operations reduced to a general rule that obviates the need for performing more primitive operations, a mental habit that we can trust, close brackets. H. The predictive precision of inverse laws of imagination, brackets, laws by which we can describe categories that we cannot imagine, close bracket, even if we can ever construct such a set of laws, it is nearly useless except as a check on our claims of laws of imagination. This is because functions, (general rules of arbitrary precision constituting deterministic results of complex operations), even if we cannot conceptualize the content of those functions, (cannot operationalize them), appear at present to be infinitely scalable, even if decreasingly precise. This is a problem with economic laws. They are extremely imprecise compared to physical laws, although possibly more precise than linguistic, imaginary, and inverse imaginary laws. Predicting the future location of water and gas molecules in real-world phenomenon is almost impossible except at very loose degrees of precision. Predicting the future actions of man in real-world scenarios is even less precise. We can explain, historically, what man accomplished, but we cannot predict what any individual will experience. Because of the time and complexity of human phenomenon, just as in physical phenomenon, we can act to alter the course of events to some degree, within the bounds of those imprecise laws. Now there may be consequences to these actions. Saving and interest have positive cumulative consequences, and expansionary credit has negative cumulative consequences. But that is not to say that we cannot distinguish between those actions that we can take to alter the course of events that produce positive and negative consequences, and that we cannot act to profit from the positive and avoid actions that are negative. Banking and interest are economic actions. Weights and measures are positive economic actions. Laws that suppress free riding in all forms are positive economic actions. States, as insurers of last resort, appear to produce a mix of positive and negative, but overwhelmingly positive results. All these institutional actions constitute good policy, the production of beneficial commons that facilitate cooperation and prosperity. Furthermore, the extension of organised suppression of free riding into the bureaucracy and into the money of representation by eliminating the monopoly bureaucracy and eliminating political representation and eliminating legislative law might be an additional institutional improvement that would facilitate human cooperation and prosperity. Now we can argue that the Keynesian attempt to distort the monetary information system by involuntarily increasing everyone's risk through lying about demand, and therefore increasing employment and consumption, is a terrible means by which to interfere with the economy. It is only slightly better than the destruction of the information system by which we cooperate in the economy by socialist and communist folly. But we may not say that there are other economic institutions that we could experimentally construct that would provide improved means of cooperation and prosperity that would not constitute lies any more than credit and interest constitute lies. For example, to create an urban market, members (shareholders) must suppress profitability of raiding and conquest of their market by those who are not shareholders. Tribal raiders and herdsmen want to participate in an urban market. They must eschew theft and raiding for entry into the market. That is a voluntary exchange. If farmers work the land and want to participate in the market using their excess production in order to buy goods that they cannot produce themselves, they must obey the rules of the buyers and sellers set by the shareholders of the market. If people wish to abandon self-production and work entirely within the market, they must adopt the behaviour of shareholders and defend the exclusive means of their sustenance. If people no longer can work in self-production, nor can they work in the market in order to obtain their sustenance, they have no means of survival, so continuing to participate in the shareholder agreement is no longer a rational exchange. If people who cannot work in the market are willing to work to maintain the shareholder agreement for shareholders, (maintain the commons, including the commons of property rights, which makes the voluntary organisation of production possible, close brackets, then it is rational to pay them to construct the voluntary organisation of production and return to being consumers within that market, their contribution being not the consumption, but the production of the voluntary organisation of production itself. However, it is also rational to limit those people to one child, so that they can reproduce, but not commit the immoral act of imposing costs upon those who are productive, upon generating additional offspring. This then constitutes a voluntary exchange and productive work, even if those people are not participating in the production of goods and services. They are participating in and being paid for the effort of constructing the voluntary organisation of production. So, to say that it is not rational or scientific or necessary to experiment in the economy, or that such experimentation is not empirical, brackets, open to observation and measurement, close brackets, is clearly false. It is merely that there are moral and immoral means of doing so, and that monetary policy, as we currently practice it, is immoral, and not very intelligent. It produces the predicted results. So, it is clearly scientific and, quote, true. But that does not mean it isn't immoral and harmful, and the cumulative effects of this policy is empirically genocidal by all extant measures. So back to Occam's razor. Isn't the purpose of rationalist and cosmopolitan arguments of the heterodox, so-called Austrians, merely convoluted verbal justification for rebelling against political experimentation in the manipulation of the economy for the purpose of producing commons? Isn't all their obscurantism just pseudo-scientific justification for the desire to justify non-contribution to the commons? Isn't it just an elaborate excuse for free riding? Isn't the more simple answer that each logic that we have developed was developed to test certain subsets of properties, and that each subset of properties requires testing against error, bias and deception, and that as the complexity of the phenomenon increases, we must test or not test those properties intrinsic to the system that we seek to test? Isn't our fascination with the rules of mathematics simply because the means of deduction and means of explanation are nearly identical mathematical operations? Whereas mathematical discovery, all conclusions are assumed in the axiom and state independent, whereas the result of human cooperation is determined more so by externalities than by the general rules, and that for any individual, events they experience are kaleidically, and economic laws are only predictive in the aggregate. Isn't all information necessary for the prediction of an axiomatic system present at the definition of the axioms, while limited and insufficiently predictive information is present in economic laws? Aren't economic laws the equivalent of bell curves rather than demonstrated tails? Isn't the information necessary to predict tail events many orders of magnitude higher than predicting events in a regular distribution? So the demonstrated evidence in the history of rationalism, the obvious incentives of rationalists as authoritarians, and the logical conclusion we must come to, is that deductive reasoning is non-predictive, because deduction did not produce general economic rules, and it cannot identify candidates for general rules. It can only test whether general rules are true regardless of their origins, and explain those general rules as a set of operations. Because we are not scientifically testing, experimenting with those laws of human behaviour, but we are scientifically testing the interactions of those various laws of human behaviour in kaleidically action, and in taking advantage of altering those phenomena of human activity, just as we take advantage of altering the course of events of physical phenomenon. We are not testing first principles, but the interaction between emergent phenomenon caused by the use of those principles in real time. The laws of the physical universe and of man appear to be trivial, but the emergent phenomenon of those simple rules appears to be infinite and unpredictable, even if they are explainable. The physical universe and man may in fact follow predictable, regular rules. Those rules are only interesting and useful insofar as we can learn how to bend them and break them for our use. Property rights, for example, bend and break human behaviour. Credit and interest, for example, let us bend and break human behaviour. Monogamous marriage lets us bend and break human behaviour. The extension of property rights and the prohibition on inbreeding bent and broke the human behaviour that made high-velocity economies possible. First principles of human behaviour may exist, but novel means of manipulating it for the production of prosperity are always available to us. The purpose of truth is testimony, our information system. Just as we may not interfere with the monetary system because of the cumulative effect of, quote, lies created by the informational distortion, we may not interfere with the, quote, truthful information system created by verbal error, bias, distortion and deception because of the cumulative effect of lies created by error, bias and deception. There is no reason we must hide our group evolutionary strategies other than for the purpose of parasitism or lying. And if we wish to understand the law of human cooperation, it is that cooperation is only rational in the absence of parasitism, and that only truthful, fully informed, productive, warranted, voluntary exchange free of negative externality constitutes true information, and that all else is just as monetary information is. The question is not whether something is empirical or rational, but whether it is true, truthfully stated, and warranted. And there is but one universal moral principle. A. Truthfully stated. B. Fully informed. C. Productive. D. Warranted. E. Voluntary exchange. F. Free of negative externality. And there is but one universal moral warrant, that any statement is A. Internally consistent, brackets, logically tested, close brackets. B. Externally correspondent, evidently tested as meaningful, predictive. C. Falsifiable and falsified, tested for parsimony. D. Existentially possible, brackets, operationally defined, close brackets. E. Moral, brackets, independent of immoral transfer, close brackets. As such, since German rationalism and Jewish cosmopolitan rationalism is not warranted, truthful speech, and cannot constitute a moral, voluntary exchange, and is equal in immorality to economic disinformation created by distortion of the money supply. It is not that Keynesian economics is unscientific, it's that it's immoral. It's not so much that German rationalism and Jewish cosmopolitan rationalism are not simply a backwards expression of Intuitionism and operationalism under empiricism, despite its inability to produce insights and only explain them. It's instead that the rationalist position is an attempt to intellectually outlaw investigation into emergent economic phenomenon, which is the purpose of scientific investigation, just as much as experimental psychology is the discipline that investigates first principles, and that has discovered the reason for our long list of cognitive biases that produce non-rational actions not anticipated by the classical model. There is no need for German and Jewish dishonest rationalism any more than there is a need for Keynesian dishonest economics. Liberty is possible under science, because science is the language of morality, of truthful speech, free of involuntary transfer by fraud. Liberty is a synonym for objective morality. Our solution is neither British Keynesian immorality, nor German and Jewish immorality, nor Anglo-American pseudo-scientific immorality, neo-Puritanism, but truth-speaking and moral voluntary exchange across peoples with different evolutionary strategies. Truth, science and morality are synonyms, and we should all be better off without all the immorality, pseudoscience, rationalism and lying. Voluntary exchange is enough.